So this is an economic one. So Phil Donahue, who used to be like a big talk show guy in the 70s and 80s, he was like before Oprah, and Oprah like modeled her whole career after him. And so this guy's Milton Friedman was a very famous economist and free market capitalist. And so Donahue is like, well, hey, you got all these people, they don't have any money, they're broke, capitalism's not really working, socialism doesn't sound so bad, and so this was his rebuttal to it. It's pretty good.
Did you ever have a moment of doubt about capitalism and whether greed's a good idea to run on?
Well, first of all, tell me, is there some society you know that doesn't run on greed? You think Russia doesn't run on greed? You think China doesn't run on greed? What is greed? Of course, none of us are greedy. It's only the other fellow who's greedy. The world runs on individuals pursuing their separate interests. The great achievements of civilization have not come from government bureaus. Einstein didn't construct his theory under order from a bureaucrat. Henry Ford didn't revolutionize the automobile industry that way. In the only cases in which the masses have escaped from the kind of grinding poverty you're talking about, the only cases in recorded history are where they have had capitalism and largely free trade. If you want to know where the masses are worst off, it's exactly in the kinds of societies that depart from that. So that the record of history is absolutely crystal clear, that there is no alternative way so far discovered of improving the lot of the ordinary people that can hold a candle to the productive activities that are unleashed by a free enterprise system.
But it seems to reward not virtue as much as ability to manipulate the system.
And what does reward virtue? You think a communist commissar rewards virtue? You think a Hitler rewards virtue? You think, excuse me, if you'll pardon me, do you think American presidents reward virtue? Do they choose their appointees on the basis of the virtue of the people appointed or on the basis of their political clout? Is it really true that political self-interest is nobler somehow than economic self-interest? You know, I think you're taking a lot of things for granted. And just tell me where in the world you find these angels who are going to organize society.
That was really good.
So he's making the argument that it was free market capitalist societies that enabled an Elon Musk or a Steve Jobs or a Sergey Brin or Larry Page from Google to be possible, because you don't see them coming out of Russia or to China at the level that they do coming out of the United States. And so what he's saying is greed is good. In other words, enlightened self-interest. I'm going to make something of value. And if people don't find value in it, they're not going to buy it. And so Donahue's, in the context of the conversation, is like, what about all the people that are poor and they're left behind, or the homeless person? What about them? And, how do we lift all them out of poverty? And so what he's arguing is that socialism, communism, Marxism, Leninist principles have never lifted people out of poverty to the degree that the free enterprise, free market system has. Those are statistical facts. Even though most of what you see on TV and the movies, especially in the Democratic Party, Kamala Harris is talking about Marxist Leninist principles, that she's going to make everything fair. And they're going, trying to take the country down the same path that Venezuela went down.
Well, the thing is, too, they're like, most of history, everybody's been poor. It's only been the capitalist system that's actually gotten people out of poverty and be able to move up. Most of the time, if you're born into poverty, you're staying poor your whole. If you're medieval, you're gonna stay a peasant. There's no chance for you, oh, well, let's let this peasant go and start his own business or stuff. No, you're a serf. You're stuck in that. Same thing with the communism. It's oh, you're assigned this job. How are you supposed to?
Yeah. So what he's saying is the commissar, the communist bureaucrat, is he going to make society more virtuous? Because a lot of what you hear a lot from the people on the left, the Marxists, the socialists, real communism, real socialism's never been tried. And their argument is always, well, we just need the right people running it to where it would be a great utopia. The problem is the people what always happens is you always get a mafia elite that you can't get rid of.
What happens when those people die?
You get a bunch of gangsters you can't get rid of. Look at Putin and still run, even though the Soviet Union collapsed, You still got a bunch of mafia gangsters running the country. Hugo Chavez promised socialism, and for a few years things did well, and then it all collapsed because all the people with the money and the entrepreneurs and the assets, they left. The
Yeah.
educated people left, and then you get a bunch of people that are depending on the government to basically give handouts, and so all the productive people have left because the government can just show up one day and go, "Hey, we're gonna give you 10 cents on the dollar for your oil company," or "Hey, you rich farmer, you got too much land. We're gonna give you 5 cents on the dollar for all of your land and all your cattle, and we're gonna take it over." And then within a few years, all the cattle's dead, and the farm's full of weeds because they run into the ground.
And then let's just say hypothetically, you put all the perfect people for communism to work. You put them, they're in power, they're running everything. What happens when they die and retire? Who replaces them? Do do you just like pick another people, or who picks the people, or does it go to their kids? It almost turns into like a kingship then. Like, oh, go, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's like when I'm not in favor of like having giant trusts. Like when you look at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and their giving pledge, where all these billionaires give all their money. Because what happens 50 or 100 years from now, all the people that started are going to be dead. And so the foundation with all its money and all of its assets, which is bigger, it's a behemoth compared to other organizations. You get a Marxist or a psychopath or a true fascist or nutcase controlling those assets 100, 200 years from now. And they can remake society because they control those assets, even though they have no connection to anybody that gave the original money or set it up because they were ruthless enough to get to the top of the food chain to basically run it. And then now that they run it, they control where the money gets invested and spent. So I think on some level, those big giant trusts, like when those people that founded it die, the majority of the money should get rebated back to the treasury. Kind of like when the Monopoly game's over, you put the money back in the box, and it's for the next game. And because they benefit off this, the system, you just can't. It's not a good idea to have those giant trusts. Like, I mean, you look at the Carnegie Foundation. When you look at the meeting minutes of going back 100 years, Andrew Carnegie, he had long since passed away. He was the guy that built the modern library system in all of the United States. But you had a bunch of Marxists and leftists that basically took over his foundations, and they were constantly talking about in the meeting minutes how they were going to direct those resources to, over the decades, impose like communism, Marxism, socialism on the United States and basically work against the interests of the country that made Andrew Carnegie possible and made the accumulation of wealth that he did over the course of his life possible. So now you got people that had no connection to him or his family because they had long since died out that got control of his foundation over 100 years ago. And they're a bunch of Marxists and socialists because it's in the meeting minutes and how they talked about how they were going to direct their money to politicians and people that supported their vision for the world, and which is now we see him as the modern day globalists, if you will.